First of all, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is invaluable. I think the sort of stuff you've been doing for the last several decades, unknown to most of us, including myself, as I just got introduced to what some of the stuff you've been doing is invaluable. And I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with us, and hopefully we'll, lead some of us to be able to act in a way, or take action so that we can kind of help things go as they are. So Mike, if you don't mind, can you just kind of give yourself maybe a quick little 2-minute introduction or something like that, so folks know who you are, what you're about, and then we'll get into a bunch of questions. I have a ton of questions that I think.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Mike Callicrate. I have a ranch and a cattle livestock operation in St. Francis, Kansas, the northwest corner of Kansas, right on the Colorado-Nebraska borders. And I raise livestock there, and I send my carcasses, slaughter on site, send my carcasses into Colorado Springs to our processing plant, and it's called Ranch Foods Direct. And basically what I've done is built my own pathway to the consumer outside of the industrial meat system. And so I go around the big packers, around the big retailers and the big food service companies, and I go direct to the consumer in every way that I possibly can. I do have some restaurants and a couple institutional accounts, but it's mostly direct to consumer sales. And so I've just built this model from pasture to plate called Ranch Foods Direct, and I spend about half my time in Colorado Springs at our plant where we break carcasses and cut stuff up, and about half my time in St. Francis at the cattle operation.
So that's what you're doing currently. Now you've got a long history of. I mean, I watched a couple of your interviews and read some of your stuff. I know you go back doing some time in the rodeo when you were younger, and then you've been I guess I don't know if it's on a mission, but you've seen a significant. I guess there's some unfair business practices going on with regard to the packers and producers. And I had the pleasure of speaking in front of U.S. Cattlemen's Association a couple of years ago, and this is the first I had heard about the sort of, I guess, animosity between the two different groups, where they're not particularly well aligned. They're kind of almost in a almost, I would say, adversarial, but they're definitely a lopsided relationship. And then I've talked with the NCBA, and with regard to research and trying to get research done on meat heavy diets. And I just, again, my sort of feeling is that the NCBA doesn't represent the interests of the cattle producers myself. But can you talk a little bit about the history? I know you talk about Packers and Stockyard Acts going back to the 1920s, and what happened historically, and what has brought us to where we are now. What is the situation right now for the cattlemen versus how we get our food from the retailers and so on and so forth?
Sure, I can. But just to hit on those organizations that don't see the world the same, membership groups in general are very vulnerable to a highly concentrated, well-organized corporate, situation that we have today. And so basically what's happened with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is it's been captured by the big meat packers. And that happened in '96 when they allowed the meat packers to come into the organization, change the name from the National Cattlemen's Association. So they've done a really great job of representing the meat packers, but not representing at all the cattle producers. And so, but that's so common across the country with our membership organizations. And then of course, they really are great at driving wedges. They know how to separate us as people who have various interests. And so we end up fighting among ourselves while they pick our pockets. And so that's something that's very true in our cattle business today. But I got out of Colorado State University in 1975, went back to St. Francis, Kansas, built my first feedlot in '78 with a group of investors locally, and operated that for 8 years. And so when I got out of CSU, Colorado State University is a land-grant university, and with my animal science degree, and I tell people, don't confuse that with animal husbandry. I was taught the industrial model of production, the big feed yards, use all the implants, the growth promoting compounds that you can possibly use, be efficient, low cost, return on investment, all that baloney. And by about 1988, I got to thinking, 13 years out of college, now having had a real education, I got to figuring out that I was really playing in a fool's game where some big meat packers were cooperating instead of competing. And so by 1996, I'd had enough of it. I'd already got out of that first feed yard and went home and built my own place. And I was really out there on a limb. I had 12,000 cattle in that feedlot as a capacity. And I wasn't liking the business at all. It was obvious the packers were cooperating, the big four were cooperating rather than competing. And so by 1996, I'd filed a lawsuit with a group of cattle producers, a lawsuit that was based upon the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921, which was basically passed by Congress to break up the power of the big five. In those days, the big five had about 70% control of the market, and were also very good at working together and cooperating. And they had essentially monopolized the market from top to bottom with top-down control. And so the producer on one hand, the consumer on the other, were both taken advantage of. Well, Teddy Roosevelt and Wilson and Senator John B. Kendrick kind of led the fight in the Senate to pass this important antitrust law that we used in the 1996 filing of our case against IBP, which is now Tyson, the biggest meat packer in the world. And so it worked its way through the courts. And basically the Packers and Stockyards Act says in general that if what you do as a meat packer so much as even has the effect of reducing competition, you can't do it. So competition was really what it was all about, but it was specifically designed to protect the producer, as opposed to the Sherman and Clayton Acts were also antitrust laws designed to break up rubber baron power of that day. That was to serve better for consumers. Well, the Packers and Stockyards Act was supposed to protect producers, and it was very effective. It did, and a consent decree of 1920 basically laid out the plan to break them up and reduce their market power, and we got competitive again until about the time Ronald Reagan entered office, and he decided that regulations were not good, and we should just let these big packers do what they want, because we need big corporations that can do business globally, in the new age of globalization and corporate power. And so now we're where we're at. And so basically that lawsuit was filed in 96. We finally made it to court in 2004 in a Montgomery, Alabama federal courthouse. We won. The jury decided for the cattlemen in the case and awarded us $1.28 billion. Well, we were happy that we won, but not ready to celebrate, because the win was not about the money. It was about getting the injunctive relief to break up the power of the big packers, like happened in 1920 and 21. Well, the judge right away, there was talk during the trial that the judge was showing favoritism, and it looked like he was in Tyson's pocket. And I argued, oh no, it's not that at all. He's just making sure the case is solid for an appeal. Well, I was wrong. He reversed the jury verdict, took it away from us, and in fact took away the $1.28 billion jury award and ordered us, as the cattle producers in the case, to pay Tyson's court costs of $80-some thousand. And so what an insult. And so then the case went on to the appeals court, where there were also plenty of those dereg Reagan type judges, and they decided to hold that decision up by the judge to reverse the jury verdict. So we went on to the Supreme Court, where John Roberts had just been seated as our Chief Justice, and had formerly, just weeks before he was assigned as Chief Justice, had heard a case based on the beef checkoff, and he represented USDA against the cattle producers in that case. So you know where he stood. He was on the Packers side. And basically what they did is they said, the Supreme Court told our lawyers in the argument that there's basically two cases. There's the cattleman's case for fair markets, and there's the Anna Nicole Smith case Family Feud case. And we're only going to hear one of the cases. And they decided to hear the Anna Nicole Smith Family Feud case, and basically then turn the big bright green light on to the big packers to just plunder and pillage. And boy, have they ever done that. And so just comparing to the difference between a competitive market and the market, the monopoly controlled market that we have today, in 1970, when we still had competition, and as a cattle feeder in St. Francis, Kansas, I could sell to as many as 20 different meat packers. And today I can't sell to any because I was basically blackballed. But the difference is that a cattleman back then was getting anywhere from 65 to 70% of what consumers spent for beef at the retail market, at a Walmart meat market or Kroger Safeway meat market. Today, that number is down around 35 to 40%. And so when you consider that a 1,350 pound average weight steer or heifer at a retail meat market today, based on USDA's reported numbers, is bringing $3,500 a head. And that doesn't include the drop credits, the head, the tail, the heart, liver, and so forth. Doesn't include that, which is about another $75 or $80. The cattle producer has lost, 35% of that, maybe 40%, depending on what day you look at the market. But that's well over $1,000 a head loss to the farm and ranch gate. And these are the people that are raising the cattle that they have 85% of the investment. They are the ones that are taking the risks. They're the ones that are providing the labor. And the other thing that's often overlooked is these are the stewards of our land. These are the people that maintain good soil health, that rotationally graze, that practice regenerative type agriculture. These are the most important people on the planet when it comes to the food on your plate. And these are the people who we are allowing the big meat packers to stand on their neck and pick their pockets and absolutely drive them out of business.
Yeah, I saw a video from a fellow named Steve Stratford. I guess he's out of Kansas. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Maybe you are, maybe you're not.
I am.
He's talking that, he says that, basically the meat packers are basically draining about $1 billion a week out of rural America by their unfair, pricing. And we're seeing, super high prices to the retailer or to the consumer. And yet the ranchers are getting the absolute worst price possible. And so we have this huge disparity. And this is obviously, there's some thought that there is some collusion there. There's some price fixing there. What is the evidence to show that? Because some people say, they're not doing that. It just so happens because the supply is tight right now because of coronavirus. But this has obviously been going on for many years. And so, do you think there is some cooperation or some collusion between the packers to fix prices?
Absolutely. In fact, when I filed that case against IBP in 1996, I got to meet a former executive vice president. His name was Hughes Bagley, who also had a lawsuit against IBP. So we were sort of attracted to each other. But Hughes, as a former VP of IBP, was in the meeting, the follow-up meeting with a Boston consulting group that had come in and in 1975, in the middle 70s, had advised IBP on how to become a bigger, better, more profitable meat packer. And some of the advice that they gave, and Hughes reported on this. In fact, I've got minutes from meetings that he provided to me. And one of the main points of advice was that you big guys are too big to really not cost each other money if you compete. You would be far better off if you would cooperate. And after that, we've got cases of Cargill selling IBP cattle when IBP needed cash cattle and couldn't find them in the market without increasing the price. We've got all kinds of evidence of collusion. I mean, when the National Cattlemen's Beef Association formed, it was really offensive to go to one of those last meetings that I went to during those years and see all those head buyers and other buyers of the big meat packers drinking together and celebrating and partying together. And of course, they knew each other well because they delegated territories. I went from having 20 meat packers I could sell to having essentially one. And basically they delegated territory. I had a Cargill buyer and 30 miles away in Goodland, Kansas, that didn't come to my feed yard for 11 years. And he still hasn't come to my feed yard, but it was 11 years when we were in the litigation. And so they really have rigged the market. The big meat packers have totally rigged the market. And these are some globally powerful companies. And in order to rig the market and not have the law applied, you really need to own the cops. And the cops for the Packers and Stockyards Act is the United States Department of Agriculture. And specifically, the agency is the Packers and Stockyards Division. Well, one of the first things Sonny Perdue did when appointed as secretary is he basically got rid of the Packers and Stockyards Agency and put it under another agency, which is really not a law enforcement agency. And so he really killed the Packers and Stockyards Division. And so the USDA is essentially owned and controlled by the big meat packers. This agency has now put itself in a position as a barrier to entry for small meat packers. It's a barrier for cattle producers to get a fair price for their livestock. They've refused to enforce the law, and they've allowed this travesty of what happened after COVID to occur. And today we've got over 1 million head of cattle that are ready for market that have no home. You know what we're doing with the hogs. We're killing them and burying them. You know what we're doing with the poultry. We're killing them and burying them as well, composting them. But what are you going to do with a bunch of 1,500 pound fat cattle when you realize, look, there's just nowhere to kill them. And so it's very, very obvious to somebody in the business, despite what our land grant economists want to say, because they basically speak for the meat packer. That's who funds them. JBS essentially owns the voice at Colorado State University. Stephen Kuntz, who is an economist that you see oftentimes speak about, the problems with meat packers and all, it's just supply and demand. He knows better than that. But the fact is, JBS finances that college. And so the USDA is looking the other way. And give you an example of the power of JBS, for example. The administrator for Food Safety Inspection Service in USDA was Al Almanza. Al Almanza was really instrumental in blocking small plants from succeeding. And nobody could really figure out, well, why do you not like small meat plants? Well, it's obviously a question of efficiency. I mean, they can put 4 inspectors in the Garden City Tyson plant, or they can put 1 inspector in Callicrate's plant. Tyson will do 6,000 cattle a day, and Callicrate will do 10 or 20 a day. So looking at it from a perspective of efficiency, which it was his excuse, not that it was a valid excuse, it does make more sense for USDA from an expense perspective to support the bigger meat packers. But it harms the producers and it harms the consumers. And of course, the food safety problems are coming out of the big plants, not the small plants. But here's a glaring problem. It was time for Sonny Perdue was appointed as our Secretary of Agriculture. And one of the things that he was faced with right away when he was secretary was the pushback of groups like mine, Organization for Competitive Markets, RCAF, United States Cattlemen. A whole lot of groups were complaining about the rotten meat that was coming in out of Brazil, primarily from JBS. And they were even acid treating it so it wouldn't smell. And it was going into commerce. And so here this foreign country, this foreign corporation was able to have access to every state in our union, to our markets, to sell rotten meat with the permission of Al Almanza, the administrator for Food Safety Inspection Service. And so Sonny Perdue said, okay, this looks bad. And, Mr. Almanza, you're going to have to stop letting that meat in. Well, his response to that order was to quit after 30 some, almost 40 years with USDA, full retirement, pension, and basically go to work for JBS. And that's what he did. He quit, and he's now the food safety officer for JBS. No telling how much money that he's being paid. But this is the corruption that's in the system. And when I say the big meat packers own USDA, I am not kidding. They literally write the policy of USDA. I remember when Dan Glickman, during the years when I was boycotted and couldn't sell my cattle, Dan Glickman was a former rep from Kansas, was appointed as egg secretary. Honestly, didn't know much about agriculture, but still he was appointed as egg secretary. And you know, I called up Dan Glickman, and when I was being boycotted, and I said, Dan, why don't you just enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act, and I wouldn't have this problem. And he basically said, well, you know, Mike, in this modern age of globalization, we need big companies that can do business globally. And so that's been the attitude of USDA the entire time. But the point is there's this revolving door. Alan Giebert would say, hey, the door is gone. They broke down the entire wall. It's just a movement from corporate into government agency and back again. And so we're all victims of that horrible policy that results from corporations writing the rules.
Mike, we've got, you know, and that's just depressing to think about, you know, Sonny Perdue's in the back pocket of JBS. And for people who don't know, JBS is a Brazilian-owned company. And also, I think what isn't National's been bought out by Marfrig, which also I think is Brazilian-owned.
That's correct.
And then we've got Tyson and Cargill. So we've got, you know, 4 companies running about 80-85% of all the beef production in the country. And I've got other issues beyond that, because I think they're going to sell out for they're relabeling themselves as protein companies, and we're going to be getting this plant-based garbage, you know, synthetic meat down the road when they control it, and then when they can sell it at a better price. So I think it's even going to become worse in my view. There's some legislation out there. There's several. I mean, there's COOL that was repealed, or MCOOL, country of origin labeling. There's obviously Massey's bill, Prime Act. There's a new one that I think Grassley just introduced, the 50-14 rule, where 50% of the cattle have to be, I guess, negotiated on, and there's a 14-day deal. I don't understand all the details on all these, but I know you said, and you've been somewhat critical of the Prime Act, not because it's not a good thing to do, but because it doesn't go far enough. Can you talk about what needs to happen? I mean, and then the other thing, really, I mean, when we look at maybe there's legislation that could get passed, I've been encouraging folks to contact their congressmen, their senators, and some have been doing it, and a lot of them are getting, we don't want to do this or that for whatever reason. But I know you talked about we need more medium-sized processing facilities. We don't need people buying hamburger. We need people buying sides of beef. Talk about what can I do as a consumer? Because I honestly, you know, when you paint the picture of everybody's in everybody's back pocket, I just don't know that the legislative route is going to happen. I mean, you know, the optimist in me says, yeah, we can all make a difference. We can get a new Secretary of Ag, or Sonny Perdue will no longer be taking whatever from JBS. But you know, I'm more of a realist. And so what can I do as a consumer? Is there anything we can do as a grassroots organization, or what needs to be done?
Well, when you say you don't think the legislation is likely going to help, I totally agree with that. When we started out 20 years ago with the Organization for Competitive Markets, we said there's really 3 legs to this approach. Litigation, which we favored and did, and have done a bunch of times and never lost in front of a jury, but always lost on appeal. Legislation, which is pretty hard to do when you've got a corporate-owned Congress. And the other one is just build your pathway to the market separate of the big industrial market or lack of market that's out there, that's controlled by the big companies, as we talked about earlier. And so how can we create that pathway? That's the one I want to be focused on, is how do we create the pathway from the farm and ranch gate to the consumer plate? And it's got to be a safe pathway. There can't be predators along the sides that are knocking you off every time you stand up. It's got to be a safe and a friendly way to get to the consumer. And so that's what we've done with Ranch Foods Direct, basically, is we've built that pathway, and we've strayed off a little bit from that pathway. We've sold to some institutional accounts that, you know, as soon as they could get some Australian beef cheaper, they did. And we lost the account. We sold to 23 Chipotles at one time. And again, as soon as they could buy imported beef cheaper, you know, the shareholder pressure was to make more money. And so we lost those accounts. We had school lunch that was all excited about serving kids better food. Kickbacks came in from the big companies like Tyson, JBS, and Cargill and Cisco. So we lost those accounts. And so we're really focused on retail. We're really focused on direct to consumer. So this is where the Prime Act really comes in. And the Prime Act's saying, look, we just don't need inspection. I mean, if the consumer can know the producer, you know, there ought to be a good relationship there that should provide safe food. And I think in general that's true. But the problem is, if that producer ever wanted to sell to a restaurant or a grocery store or a wholesale account, a third party, to be able to reach a consumer, couldn't do it because of lack of insurance. No insurance company is going to step in and provide insurance so that I can sell to an institutional account unless I have my meat inspected. And so I really think some inspection, better inspection, we got to always talk about better inspection than USDA, because USDA has really just almost gone to non-inspection, except for the overuse of power on the small plants, the abusive, the confrontational, the onerous type inspection that they provide to small plants. Like Greg Gunthorpe might have 4 inspectors at his small plant in Indiana, while up the road at a plant that does 10 or 15,000 pigs a day, they'll have 2 inspectors perhaps. So we've really gone non-inspection on the big packers, and we've gone over inspection on the small ones. So that needs fixed. And basically we just have to make that happen through our vote of whatever citizenship we can exert on this government. And so in building that alternative market, the Prime Act doesn't go far enough from the perspective that it doesn't allow us to cross state lines. And so let's say you live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, your urban center is Denver, Colorado. It's Colorado Springs. If you live in St. Francis, Kansas, it's 400 miles to Kansas City. It's 180 to Denver. It's 200 to Colorado Springs. If I can't cross the state line, I'm in real trouble. I can't sell my meat. And so I really like what we're seeing here with Senate Bill 1720. It's the New Markets for State Inspected Meat and Poultry Act. And really it's the Prime Act plus a little better. And so this idea that we don't need inspection at all, I think is a bad idea. I mean, we've got a reminder from Upton Sinclair's day of 1906 when he wrote The Jungle. And boy, this'll hurt. We're worse now than then. We have got more unsafe meat. We've got a more concentrated market. We've got worse worker abuse today than we had then. Today is worse than the jungle. And this is with USDA supposedly supplying us or furnishing us with inspection. And I'm just saying we have to have a better system than that. And so what I'm suggesting we do is get the states to go ahead and implement inspection. Many of them have it, but they may not be using it. They don't have the funding to support it. Let's reauthorize that funding and let's get it from the federal government. Today, I've got an inspector that might come to St. Francis, Kansas, travel 300 miles one way to get there, and likely came from a plant that's got a COVID problem. He comes into St. Francis, Kansas. He has to drive on Sunday 300 miles to get there to go to work on Monday morning. And he's got to leave late on Friday to drive back home, only to come back to St. Francis the following Sunday. I mean, he has no time off. USDA is treating a lot of their inspectors no better than the packers are treating their workers. It's abusive what they do to these inspectors. And so they're not very happy when they're in St. Francis, Kansas, at this remote place far from home. And I feel for them. But USDA has got a system designed for big meat packers, not small meat packers. So that all has to change. And I'm just saying, let's go back to the Talmadge-Aiken type of structure where the federal government funds state inspectors to basically deliver inspection at those small plants and be able to put the market inspection on the meat to where it can cross state lines. That needs to happen. And we need to expand that rather than just eliminating inspection altogether and not being able to ship across state lines. So the Prime Act, I think, has got people's attention, but it just doesn't go far enough, and it doesn't help enough plants. And the other problem is, if you are an individual that's slaughtering your animal at a custom plant, under the Prime Act, basically no inspection, but you can only sell within the state. And so now you can sell a steak instead of a quarter of beef to somebody, right? Or instead of a whole animal to somebody. Well, that sounds great, but the 20 years that I've been in this business, the people that are going broke are the ones that are selling the steaks and the roasts and the individual 1 pound packages of hamburger. The people that are selling the whole animal are still around. And what happens is you can sell all your steaks pretty easily, but then you end up with this freezer full of trim or ground beef that you can't sell. Now, COVID has helped us clean out a lot of that freezer storage because people want that ground beef right now, but you have to be able to sell the whole animal. And so it's very important to structure something to where that whole animal can be sold. And I would love to get consumers everywhere to just say, look, I'll buy a quarter, and you know what, a quarter is too much. It won't fit in my freezer, but I've got friends that I can split it with. And so maybe you sell an eighth or sell a half or I mean, just get it to where we're selling those whole animals. The other cool thing about being able to sell a whole animal is if you can do a standard bone-in cut, you can cut 5 of those animals in the time it takes you to do a full value-added boneless processing on an animal. So the small plant can put through a lot more animals in a standard cut bone-in, what we would call it a cow pool or a cow share kind of a thing. And so that product moves through these small plants much, much faster, and also moves through with less skilled labor as well. So we're really promoting that people try to sell anywhere from an eighth to a quarter to a half to a whole animal, and you can ship it by UPS or FedEx. You can make a delivery into the urban center where you can have drop-offs. But I think this is the way to get that producer best connected to the consumer right now. Now, if you want fillets instead of porterhouses or strips instead of porterhouses, if you want a shoulder tender, if you want flat iron steaks, if you want all this cool stuff, if you want tomahawks, then get those from the local butcher, where it's going to cost more, but get those from the local butcher. And right now, let's say we sell that cow pool, talking about ranch gate income. If we can sell a cow pool for the same price as Walmart is selling their meat, but without the 12% added solution, without the pink slime added to the grind, and the fact that there's not 1,000 animals in a pound package of ground beef, all of those things you get when you buy that from that rancher or that farmer feeder, and you're going to sell that to the consumer at the same price that they can buy it at Walmart for, there's no argument about the price. And the other cool thing is when you're selling meat that way, the consumer is actually only paying for what is in the box that they are receiving. If you go back to the custom plant that doesn't have an inspection, can't cross state lines, you've got to buy the cow. And when you buy the cow, it weighs 1,200 pounds. You get less than 500 pounds of meat. And as a consumer, you're thinking, what happened to my cow? And so the small plant is trying to convince you, well, the carcass yields 63%, and then we only get 65% out of the carcass. And you know what? They're just not believing you. They can't believe there's that much loss. Well, with the cow share, cow pool kind of a program, they only pay for exactly what they get. They can weigh it on their bathroom scale when they get home. Everybody's happy. And of course, the meat tastes far, far better than what you're going to get at a retail grocery store. And now you're in business, and they're telling all their friends and family that they should buy from you. So that's just a better model. But you've got to be inspected to be able to do that, to be able to sell a cow pool to various people and sell retail weight instead of live weight. You have to be inspected. But don't you know the big meat packers write these rules so that you are disadvantaged, so that you do have to sell the whole cow, so that you can't sell parts and pieces that people can better afford? The big meat packers write the rules. It doesn't matter what Congress passes in the way of legislation, just like the mandatory price reporting. They threw in a confidentiality act. So now we can't see the sweetheart deals that the big packers are giving their captive supply feedlots. That goes back to that 50-14 rule we were talking about earlier. And so they've really structured it to where the rule on country of origin labeling. Why would we only want to label non-whole muscle meat as far as country of origin labeling? Why wouldn't we want to know where our meat comes from, even at McDonald's, Burger King, a restaurant that we go into? Why would it just be on those retail whole muscle cuts that we're buying? Why wouldn't I want to know where my ground beef comes from? Why exclude all of these things? Because they knew they could kill country of origin labeling by doing so. Well, eventually they just got it repealed, which is crazy. We can't know where our meat comes from. And Brazil's product coming in, that rotten meat coming in out of JBS from Brazil, was able to be reboxed and marked product of the USA with USDA's permission. Now, this is a corrupt agency. So this is what we have to do. We have to sell direct to consumers and have nothing but total transparency and trust in the transaction.
Michael, if we let's just say, I've got in this little meeting, there's a few dozen, several dozen people, but in this group, we've got thousands of people, members. And, do I have to be in the same state to buy, like, if four of us go together, just to be me and four of my neighbors to buy it that way? Or can I buy stuff with three people from three different states and divide a cow up that way currently?
If you're buying from a USDA inspected plant, it doesn't matter where you live in the United States. You can ship it anywhere you want. If it's not inspected, or if it's a state inspected plant, which there are not that many of them because they don't want to fund themselves and they can't ship across state lines. So it doesn't do them a lot of good. You can't ship across the state line unless you are federally inspected under USDA.
Okay. So what is preventing, like I said, I know you said like there's small facilities where they may run 20, 30, 40 head of cattle a day versus these giant people that process 20,000 cows a day. How do we get the, it seems like there's room for an in-between model. Like, you got somebody that can process, 500, 1,000 a day, and regionalize it. What's preventing regionalization of these? I know there's only 27 processors, major processors in the US or something like that. What's preventing us from having, say 300 or something like that? So you have one every 100 miles or so.
So the thing that prevents the market in the middle, or the packer in the middle, or even the rancher or farmer in the middle, is lack of access to retail and food service. So you might be able to kill 500 cattle, but you're still competing against JBS, Cargill, Tyson, and Marfrig, the biggest corporations in the meat business on the planet, and they've all got sweetheart deals with the big retailers. I talk about how the big retailers are robbing the bank and the big packers are driving the getaway car. It's really the retailer that's capturing the most of that farm gate income that they're not entitled to. And, it's like John Tyson told me in 2002 when I first met him at the Cattlemen's Association, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association there. He was there announcing the purchase of IBP by Tyson. So the biggest chicken company just purchased the biggest beef company, and that wasn't setting well with cattle producers. But he was going to make everybody happy and tell them he wasn't going to chickenize the beef industry, which is exactly what he's tried to do and has honestly got it done at this point. But Tyson has a special deal with Walmart. And what he told me when I told him about the lawsuit that was against IBP, the company he was getting ready to buy, he says, well, Mike, Walmart dictates to us what they'll pay. We have no choice but to pay you less. And so when we talk about the 50-14 rule, the 30-14, the captive supply rule, the way they pay less is by having captive supplies and not having to bid in the cash market. And so basically they can pay whatever they want for cattle. That's only limited by the amount that cattlemen protest, or however loud our voice becomes, or whatever the threat of litigation may be. That's only limited by that. Otherwise, they're taking all they can take, and all they can get away with. And so the big retailers dictate to the biggest meat packers. Now the retailer has more power than the meat packer. And so to have a 500 head a day plant, you'll never get access to the retail market. You'll never be able to sell those cattle. And so what we have to do is we have to break up the big retailers and the big meat packers. And you're thinking, oh, wow, that's not going to happen. With all these Walmart shoppers that love cheap stuff, they're not going to support that. Well, go back to 1920. when we had the same problem with big meat packers controlling the retail, controlling the yard where the cattle were purchased from the rancher, controlling the railroads, the cold refrigeration cars, all of that. They controlled the entire pathway. We broke them up, and it was great what happened afterwards. But if you read the consent decree of 1920, it gives you the instructions on how to break them up now. Basically, it's the framework that we need. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to one of our FTC commissioners, Rohit Chopra. And Rohit is a minority voice on the Federal Trade Commission. And this is the agency that will break them up if that occurs. It won't be the Justice Department or any other agency. It'll be the Federal Trade Commission. And so what I asked Rohit if he would work on, I said, would you write the consent decree for 2020? And he said, I'm already working on it. And so how do you get Rohit as the lead commissioner to where he can orchestrate the breakup of the big meat packers and give us all a safe and dependable food supply again? How do we do that? Well, if he's the lead commissioner, he can orchestrate that. And then I got to tell you, we just have to clean out Congress and get the right people in, and we can get this done. But there needs to be a huge turnover.
Yeah, that's a tough hill to climb, obviously. I mean, those sorts of things, trying to wholesale replace Congress, you know, and many of the ones that the new ones that just get bought up too. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Mark, you still there?
We have to know what that consent decree looks like. But you know what? I'm not waiting on that. I'm building my own pathway to the market. Why not replicate? And I really like the bill from the Senate bill that Debbie Stabenow's proposing, the Food Supply Protection Act, and that's going to have money in it for infrastructure to start rebuilding it. The other thing I like a lot is John Eichert, just a champion for fair markets and family farm agriculture. John Eichert has this concept of local food utilities. So understand the rancher and the farmer are putting up all this capital, taking all this risk. Why doesn't the consumer help out a little here and own some of this infrastructure and make sure the rents are so low they can't go broke? And so this can be done as well. And I've got the model already built from my place in St. Francis to Colorado Springs. That just needs replicated around the country. Let's support movements like that so more and more consumers can buy more directly.
Yeah, I wonder, you know, one of the things that has come out of this, you know, and there's a lot of, you know, obviously sort of negativity through this pandemic and, you know, and now these, you know, craziness with the race riots and stuff we're seeing, or just riots in general. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but there's some people that are saying, you know, let's look at this sort of situation and think about ways we can do business or a lot of things differently. And one of the things that I've seen is a lot more people are utilizing things like Amazon to get their food. I mean, is there any utility in that? People getting used to that and not going to the grocery store? Could you somehow, and I know Amazon's got its problems, there's a lot of people that are anti-Amazon, but is there a way to leverage that, get people more used to ordering beef online? You know, is that going to be a net positive for folks like you? Or is it better just to drive out to the ranch and pick it up in your pickup truck? Well,
you know, what you're suggesting is, how do we avoid the concentrated power? And I've always said that concentrated power and wealth is the greatest threat to any free society, which permeates all this stuff that's going on right now, from the riots to the low wages. I mean, we've got 21 packing house workers living in a single trailer house. The beds never grow cold in Garden City, Kansas, because they're working 3 shifts at IBP. You know, that goes back to those days of the jungle. And I don't like the Amazon option. That's concentrated power of its own kind that I think is very, very potentially destructive. And Amazon wants too much. They want too big a share of what you're trying to market. And so we've incubated a company here in Colorado Springs that I think has got amazing advantages. It's a company called Biteable. And if you go to the ranchfoodsdirect.com website and you click on that to buy, then what you'll see is a logo up in the upper left-hand corner that's called Biteable. And it's kind of a play on bite for the computer bite and table, right? So and their tag is the future of food is transparent. And what we've done in our warehouse in Colorado Springs is incubated this small company to where now it's in business and it's shipping food all over the country. And they not only help me and provide the platform I need to be able to ship to my customers wherever they are in the United States, but they're also carrying the products for White Oak Pastures, Will Harris down in Georgia. Because we're on the west side of the Mississippi now, Will can access California and a lot of the other places where our consumers are. We also are representing here for Biteable is representing Greg Gunthorpe with Gunthorpe Farms, who has some of the best pasture-raised pork in the country. And so what we do is we develop a hub of distribution where anybody can come in and access that. But it's got to be a product that can stand the scrutiny of transparency. So we want to be able to see and know how this animal was produced and what was done to it and how it got to your plate. And that's the only catch with Biteable is they want full and total transparency. Now you don't need third-party certification. And basically what they've got is a blockchain model that they're building. And so so you will know when the animal was born, basically, or the month that it was born in St. Francis, Kansas. You're going to know that it's an Angus cow bred to a Wagyu bull. You're going to know when it was processed. You're going to know what the temperature of the carcass was, all the way to Colorado Springs. USDA likes that, or any food safety person would like that. Then you're going to know when it was cut up and when it was shipped. All of that being transparent and available to the consumer, but via the web. And so that's the model of Biteable. So what did Biteable do? They all winter long, they worked with UPS, FedEx, negotiated freight rates that I had never imagined could be possible. I shipped my nephew, Biteable shipped my nephew a 40-pound box a couple of weeks ago to San Francisco for $15. That's nuts. I mean, that I could never imagine doing that. You can't drive from Castle Rock, Colorado to Colorado Springs for that much. And so that's opened up a whole new world for us to be able to access the nation's consumers. Not that I like selling or selling on the internet, because what I'd really like you to do is buy from somebody in California if you live in California. We want to localize, regionalize the markets to where we support the people who are our neighbors and who live in our community and keep the money at home. But let's all of us do this. Let's all replicate, as many as we can, replicate what Ranch Foods Direct has done. And we all then have our own thriving economies with safe and healthy food with farmers that are earning a living income.
Mike, are you using USDA inspectors then with Ranch Foods Direct, or is that no?
I am, yes. I'm fully inspected at St. Francis, Kansas, at our slaughter operation. The inspector has to be there full time. So they have to have a pre-mortem and a post-mortem, and they have to check the organs and the health of the animal all the way through the process. Now, on my plant in Colorado Springs, where I also have USDA inspection, my inspector might call on 5, maybe 6 plants. So because I'm processing inspected meat, they don't have to be here all the time. And so when COVID hit and our business went skyrocketing, I asked USDA, can we have an extended day without paying overtime? Can I work 10 hours instead of 8 hours? And basically they said no. And it was so easy. It wouldn't have cost them any money. But that's just how they are. They don't support small plants. And so USDA is, again, a major barrier for small plants to access consumers. So let's work on that. Let's fix that.
Yeah, I mean, is it, it's just kind of interesting. We have, like, for instance, a lot of people, when they find out that huge percentages of our beef industry and pork industry is controlled by foreign interests, China owning Smithfield and Marfrig JBS owning, half the beef supply. Is there, I mean, is it time right for just to sort of push away from that? I mean, I know it can be used as a leverage point, because a lot of people say, I want to buy U.S. beef. And then you have the Canadians that are saying, well, we do a pretty good job too. And we've got this kind of crazy, interesting relationship with Canada, how cows are shipped up there and brought back. And what's the solution with the foreign stuff? Do we keep the foreign markets wide open? Do we restrict it? I know Trump said something about not going to import beef, which is probably just political posturing, but is there any sort of way we can leverage that into helping what you want to see done locally, at least in the U.S. And then every other country obviously has to take care of itself. But what do we do with
Well, right now, with 1 million cattle not having a home that are market ready, the very first thing you should do is shut down imports. Shut down those live animal imports, shut down any beef imports that are coming into our country. Let those countries deal with that themselves. And one of the things that's really important to know is it doesn't matter if you're a producer in the United States or a producer in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Australia, New Zealand. It doesn't, Namibia, Africa, who's now shipping to us. It doesn't matter where you are being exploited by the same big meat packers. And so what they do is they leverage one producer set from one country against the United States producers. And it's the low cost producer that wins. Well, nobody is producing above cost of production. All of us are being exploited by this corporate power. So we would all be better off adjusting our supply to the demand of the country we live in. And if you can't produce cattle, heck yeah, go ahead and import and somebody will ship something to you, but it shouldn't be at the expense of your own producers. And so the United States, with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association policy that supports packer interests over producer interests, they love imports because, and they frame that up, well, we need lean beef to come in and get blended with the fat, the extra fat off our finished cattle. Well, wait a minute, pay up for cull cows, pay up for the cull bulls. There's plenty of cattle here. We don't need to feed these Holsteins so long to make them so fat. Why not harvest those? We've got all kinds of dairy cattle that we could utilize in our grind. Why are we putting United States producers at such a deep disadvantage by using foreign beef and cattle against them? It's fundamentally wrong to do that to a U.S. citizen who's paying taxes and trying to support a country here, to put them out of business with cheap imports that are purchased below their cost of production in another country. Stop it. Simply stop it and let us feed ourselves and enforce all of the antitrust laws again, break up the big corporations, and eventually we get there back to where we were in 1970 with the rancher getting 65 or 70% of the consumer dollar, and rural communities are healed.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure this, because I have people I know that sort of make, sort of beef products, and they've talked to me and I've asked them, and they said, some of them you try to use US beef and then they find out that they can save 50% by getting it from Australia or New Zealand. How is that possible that you can raise cattle on the other side of the planet and it can cost you less? I know it seems like the cost to raise a cow in Australia should be the same as it costs in the US. Where's that extra fat coming from, that money coming from, that's driving the prices up?
Well, for a while, and it still happens, is the value of the dollar. So you've got these big companies that are leveraging, the exchange rates and border taxes and value added taxes, and there's a lot of other trade related type of things games that they play. But basically, if you go to Australia, they're producing below cost of production, and perhaps they've got land that's way cheaper than our land. It's like the public lands ranchers versus the deeded lands ranchers. Public lands ranchers can utilize publicly owned land a lot cheaper than the guys in Kansas that only have deeded land available to them. But that doesn't mean that they should have to give their livestock away. But the bottom line is, these foreign countries cannot produce it that much cheaper than us, except for the things that we talked about, trade related things. But a lot of times they're subsidized, perhaps. Maybe they're chopping down the Amazon to get cheap pasture for more cattle. That's precisely what they're doing right now. And so oftentimes it's subsidies. I mean, some of our disputes with the Canadians have been unfair subsidies to their cattle industry. But Canada is a great example, because JBS and Cargill control their market, just like they control ours. And so they're just pillaging and plundering those Canadian ranchers. So we've got everything in common with the producer in these countries. It's not that we're going to block imports and hurt them. It's a matter that we're going to make trade fair again, so all of us, no matter where we live, can get a living income.
Mike, we've got NCBA. I just, we're this is a group of people that eat pretty much all meat diet or only meat diet. So we're kind of fringe as it is, and we're just amazed at the support we have. Everybody wants to go plant based, and we're not interested in that. And we see the marketing dollars, but I've always been sort of unimpressed by the marketing that goes into beef in general. But how do we it seems like U.S. Cattlemen, RCAF, and some of these other organizations would be supportive of direct rancher to consumer. How do you get a marketing campaign together so people find out about this? Because of the few thousand people that see this is a drop in the bucket versus the millions of people that need to understand this type of thing. So, is there a way there can be a collaborative type thing saying buy local beef, and put it out there in marketing? You could blast it on social media. I mean, there's people that I think would definitely take up this cause that have a lot of reach. So is there any efforts in the works to try to consolidate those groups that might have enough money to put a marketing campaign together?
That is just something that does need to happen, but it's hard because there's no money. The producers are the last ones that can put up money. They've been struggling for so long. But the thing that's just glaring in your face and upsetting ranchers everywhere is the misuse of the money that they do spend to do exactly what you just described. That should be developing markets, should be promoting beef to U.S. consumers, should be supporting pathways from farm to ranch gate to plate everywhere. And that's called the beef checkoff. Well, the beef checkoff has been stolen by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And those resources, it's a mandatory tax that cattle producers have to pay $1 per head on every time an animal's sold. And it amounts to $80-some million a year. And those dollars have been redirected for the benefit of the big meat packers and to support the biggest retailers and Cisco, the biggest food distributor in the country, and at the direct expense of the rancher. If we could redirect the checkoff so it actually did what it was designed to do, and that is help producers, wow, could that ever be amazing what we could do? As you just described so well, what we could do to inform consumers. But one thing the checkoff will never do today in the hands of the NCBA is tell consumers that the food system is broken, that this industrialized food system is broken, and with COVID it's shown that it cannot work. And now that consumers do know how those meat packing plant workers have been treated, they're less likely to want to buy that meat. So it's a perfect time to tell the consumers there are other options, but help us build it, because the big meat packers, and by controlling government and controlling our organizations, have eliminated the small plant infrastructure across the country, and we have to rebuild it. And let's offer them that opportunity to invest in that. So it's a public kind of an investment, and not just a bunch of private equity people that have unrealistic expectations of profits. So yeah, that checkoff, boy, if we could just redirect that, get it away from NCBA. NCBA, we've got to take it away from them. And right now, that movement is building and building fast. I'm hearing people right now saying, I don't care what, this fall when I sell my calves, I am not paying it. I am not paying that checkoff. And you will be in direct violation of federal law when you don't pay it. And they're saying, so what? It's an unfair and an unjust law.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could opt out of checkoff. I mean, can you just say, I don't want to be part of this? Is that possible? You can just say, I'm not.
No, you cannot. It is a mandatory tax by law that every time you sell an animal, you have to pay $1 per head into the checkoff. And the animals might get sold, 2 or 3 times before they finally go to the meat packer. So it's a lot of money. It's about $80 million a year. And NCBA has engineered a plan to capture that checkoff and put it to the packers' benefit and the big retailers, of course.
Yeah, I guess we move around 30 million. We process around 30 million head of cattle a year, so that makes sense. You move them from stocker to feed yard to processor, so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So, it's I'm just trying to think. What as a consumer sitting here going, I don't like this. This is bothersome to me. What is the best thing I can do? I mean, obviously, tell your congressman vote for this or that. And again, I'm not going to hold my breath that it gets passed, but I mean, what else can I do that I can actually definitely do?
Well, I think for like an example in Colorado Springs, been here 20 years, and over the last 10, I've really tried to promote a public market concept. And the best example that I know of right now is the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia. It's really the hub of the city, and it's the #1 tourist attraction. It's 70 vendors inside a public space that just everything's local. It's good food. It's energy. It's just a great place for your community to gather. And I think maybe the city council in Philadelphia just favors small business over big business. But this is something that we can do in our own communities. Start those food hubs. We've got one here, Ranch Foods Direct in Colorado Springs. And in response to COVID, now we have the Southern Colorado farmers market, virtual farmers market, where you can buy online and you can drive through and never even get out of your car. We'll hand you your order in a sack right through your window if you want. Or you can come on into Ranch Foods Direct and shop, whatever you may want to do. But we've got to build this local infrastructure. And I know it doesn't happen tomorrow, but we have to find out what we all have in common instead of what we differ on. And what we have in common is we need a safe, healthy, and dependable food system throughout America. And I think by building many more of these food hub, public market type operations, sort of on the basis of John Eichert's public food utilities model, that's going to make a big difference. And of course, the other thing that you simply got to do is you've got to recover from what I think is the most deadly disease in human history. And that is aggressive price shopping consumerism. You have got to stop shopping at Walmart. You have got to stop going to the dollar store. I talk about Walmart killing and consuming the prey, the small business Main Street model. And the dollar store then shows up to eat the decaying remains. And when the dollar store shows up, you are now fully engaged in the secondhand economy. Even the wealth creators on farms and ranches across the country have almost nowhere they can go to buy fresh and healthy food. And almost all of our rural communities now of any size have a dollar store. And the Walmart isn't all that far away. And so we have to stop supporting what we do not want. And this aggressive price shopping consumerism is so unbelievably self-destructive. We have got to stop it because we're all being played for fools. Because when you go to Walmart and you buy that tube of whatever, it says beef on the label, but I don't know about it. When you buy that, you are supporting everything that's wrong in our food system. You've got to buy good, healthy food from places that you know and support to every extent possible those local farmers and ranchers. Buy from them and don't try to beat them up on the price.
Is there, does anyone have like you talk about these food hubs, are some of them already in process that we know about? Is there a list of those that we could at least, put up for people to support those places? Because not everybody in here is going to be able to start a food hub. I mean, personally, I don't know. I have no idea how I do that. I mean, it's just kind of like, a lot of people have jobs where they can't create food hubs. But I mean, how do we support? Are these ones that already exist that we can support at the very least?
I think I don't have a list offhand, but I would just go to Google and type in food hubs or organizations that support food hubs. Read Civil Eats. What a great publication. The Counter used to be New Food Economy. It's just one of the best publications out there as well. But I think we can just basically search for keywords like food hub, local food, and that sort of thing. RCAP, I know, put together a list of ranchers that you can buy directly from, which is really helpful. So we don't have near enough communities that are working on food hubs, but there have been organizations around for a very long time that are working on them and that do have lists of various places that we can go. But there is the other thing we have to be very aware of is the level of food fraud. It doesn't matter what word you coin, whether it's natural, hormone, antibiotic-free, family farm raised, humanely produced, they've all been co-opted. And so you go into the restaurant on Tejon Street in Colorado Springs, a new restaurant, and they say everything on the menu is local. Well, I'm from here. They don't know me, but I'm in there, and I'm saying, where do you get your beef? And they say it's local. I said, well, where is it from? And they said, I don't know. Let me go look. And so they go back to the kitchen. They come back. We lost the box and the pack. It's out of the wrapper, and we can't really tell you where it comes from. I said, well, what you can do is look at the invoice. And then, of course, now I've asked way too many questions, and the manager shows up at the table. And I say, I need to know where your beef comes from. And he says, well, we throw the boxes away. I says, well, go check your invoice. And now he knows he's in trouble. He goes and checks his invoice, and he says, well, it comes from Greeley, Colorado. I said, oh, great, Greeley, Colorado. What's the name of the company? And it finally gives it up, and it's the most painful thing you've ever seen. And of course, if you went there to enjoy the meal, you probably already wrecked that idea. But the fact is, I got it out of him. And he said, it's Aspen Ridge, Greeley, Colorado. Well, that's just a fake label of JBS. And this is the food fraud we're dealing with. So as a consumer, you've got to be willing to ask more than one question. You've got to ask until you actually get the grant of inspection establishment number, if you have to, and look it up on your phone, and you will know right where that meat comes from, for the most part. And so food fraud is a seriously major barrier to family farm and ranch agriculture and to the alternative food system development.
Hey, Mike, if you'll indulge us one last topic, because I know you kind of touched on this, but a lot of people here are very much becoming cognizant of the concept of regenerative agriculture. You know, I've talked with Will Harris, and I've talked with Glenn Elzinga, and you know, Alan Savory, and you know, Bobby Gill from Savory. I've talked to so many people in the regenerative space over the last few years to see that probably is something we should support. And we've got a huge system where we subsidize the hell out of grain, you know, in our food USDA or whatever. We just subsidize the heck out of this. Does that make a difference? Is just switching over to a more regenerative style, you know, if you want to call it grass finished, you know, adaptive multi-paddock grazing type of situation, is that going to support this overall thing? Can this work in this framework, or can we do it with a traditional feeder model as well? I mean, how do we use both of those things?
I think regenerative agriculture is absolutely a part of it. It has to be part of it. If we want a circular economy, one that is regenerative rather than sustainable. You know, I almost hate the word sustainable. It's been so overused and co-opted. But I still have to go back to sustainable, because again, I love talking about John Eichert. He's such a great spokesman for what we want to do. John Eichert, when I first got on to regenerative ag 6 years ago or whenever, how long it was, I went to John Eichert and I said, hey, John, this is the coolest thing ever. And I've got Callicrate Cattle Company that now that I'm not selling to the big meat packers, I can do what I want. I don't have to use performance enhancing drugs. I can rotationally graze. I can do all these really cool things. We even take our bones and turn them into bone char, which goes back into the soil as an amendment, high calcium, phosphorus, and carbon. We're doing everything you can think of. I mean, but before we make bone char, we're making broth from those bones. So we've got broth, and we've got little broth bombs that you pop one in a hot cup of water, and you're drinking a cup of broth. You're throwing them in your chuck roast, whatever, when you make that. So that we just elevated the health so much in our whole overall concept. But everything is circular. It's soil back to soil. Everything, there's zero waste, like Bill Harris talks about, like Gabe Brown talks about. That is critical to be part of this, because the other model, and you talk about the feeder model, the most ideal model to me right now is a farmer feeder. Maybe he's in the state of Iowa, and what he grows on his land gets marketed through his livestock. But what happens when his livestock go to market? He cleans the pens out and puts the manure back on the land. That's circular. That's regenerative. You don't have to graze at all. I mean, some of us live in climates where you can't graze in the winter, where there's just no grass in the winter. And so we feed those animals. To me, that's even a better model than a lot of the ones that are just so totally strictly grass-fed. And you end up with a really high quality product from an animal that's nutritionally just really well taken care of and well fed. And so everything has to be circular. If you look at the industrial model, the one I learned in college, it's all about mining and extraction. It's an extractive model that takes away. And if you fly over eastern Colorado, like I do every week in my plane, and you look down and you look at the topsoil that has been lost over the last 75 years, probably, much of that land has been put into CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, where we pay farmers to put land back to grass, and then it's been taken out again, and it's been farmed, and then it goes back and forth, and we keep paying as taxpayers for this game that these farmers have played on this marginal land, and what we've actually promoted was soil loss. So when wind blows and the water washes topsoil away, we as a society are losing our topsoil. When you lose your topsoil, according to David Montgomery, your society fails. You just go extinct. It's simple. You can't eat anymore. And this is where we're headed big time. The biggest export out of Iowa is topsoil down the Mississippi River. So the regenerative ag has got to be a part of a model. Any model going forward has to include regenerative ag, soil building. I'm amazed at how fast you can build soil with that multi-paddock grazing program. We've been doing that now. This would be our second year. Before, we've always rotationally grazed, but we haven't done it in the small paddock with lots of concentration of animals and hoof traffic in those places. When we started doing that, we don't have a fly problem because our cattle are being moved away from the fly larvae. The dung beetles get to go to work. The dung beetles then get to bury that manure into the pasture. Well, before, where we were using insecticides to get rid of the flies, we also got rid of the dung beetles. And so any of these people that say you can't feed the world with regenerative ag, honestly can't be more wrong. You can't feed the world with industrial ag long term. It will not work. We can't afford the inputs. But guess who sells us our inputs? Same companies that buy our cattle.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great, Mike. So thank you so much. This has been very enlightening. I know it's some people probably it's completely over their head because they don't have any idea about this stuff. But I mean, I think we need to know this stuff. We need to know where our food's coming from. We need to know where our food's going. You know, I think we're at a critical juncture here. Hopefully we can capitalize on the at least awareness about what's going on with the bottlenecking and so on and so forth. Do we have any good allies in politics right now? I mean, you mentioned John Eichert and, a few. I mean, are there people we can get behind and support? And I mean, are there any other? I know you mentioned the FTC fellow. I forgot his name now, but where can we?
Well, yeah, Rohit Chopra with the Federal Trade Commission. But Sean, unfortunately, our allies are mostly on the Democrat side. Cory Booker's got a good plan for breaking up big corporations, or certainly not allowing additional mergers. We've got Tim Ryan. He ran. Remember when he was running for the Democrat nomination, he talked a lot about regenerative agriculture. Wouldn't it be great to have him as a Secretary of Agriculture? But we have others as well. J.D. Scholten that's running against Steve King up in the northwest corner of Iowa. Boy, would that be a wonderful replacement in Congress over Steve King. But there are people running, and they're running on healthier, safer food systems and economies that serve everyone instead of a few. So that's the words I want to hear out of a politician. So when I get a call from somebody and they want my support, I ask them those questions, and I don't take it lightly whether I support them or not. It's a very serious decision. But we just haven't had good politicians for a very long time. They're in the pocket of big money, and so we have to fight Wall Street's control and honestly big global money's control over our economy in general and specifically over our food system.
Yeah, one of the things that, when we started this community here, and we've got a lot of different goals here. Obviously, one of it's trying to get people healthy and get rid of eat healthy food and so on and so forth. But we also, long-term, as we continue to grow, as our membership grows into the thousands and many thousands, hopefully into the tens and hundreds of thousands eventually, we want to, try to be a community that affects the world around us via policy and some of the things. And so I just hopefully that we can lean on you as someone that can help kind of give us some idea what might be effective, and where do we put our resources as they continue to grow. And that's, like I said, that's just my hope, is one of the reasons I started this community. And so hopefully that.
Well, you certainly can lean on John.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if you go to mycallicrate.com, I've got a blog and a listserv, and you can also see what I do there. But I try to keep people, informed. Of course, Facebook's a good tool. Twitter's a decent tool as well. But so we've got better tools now to work with, to where we can come together as citizens, and I think really do make a difference in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a big missing part, because most people don't know where the hell their food comes from. I'm sitting here in the middle of Southern California, where I can't see cows for a long ways from where my house is. But so I do think this alliance between people that want to eat, particularly people that want to eat healthy, and our food producers is critical. And hopefully we can continue to foster those relationships, because I think both of our interests are well aligned. I mean, you guys want to put out a good product. I think you care. I mean, this is a thing, we see ranchers being demonized as these evil people that are there. We hear this from the plant-based community, how they're torturing their animals and yada, yada, yada. And it's just all garbage. But at the same time, you were seeing that the average age of a rancher is 63, and it doesn't look too. It's hard to get into the business if you don't own the land already. It's impossibly hard to buy the land, and I don't know. I mean, it's scary where it continues to be further centralized, and then not only is it they control the meat and the quality of the meat, but then the meat is no longer even meat. It becomes this sort of synthesized. And I already see soybeans and pea protein being shoved into hamburger, ground up and mixed, and called quote unquote healthy, environmentally friendly meat, and it's all coming from monocrop agriculture. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff here, Mike. Thank you so much. Where can people, if somebody wants to buy some meat from you, Mike, where can they go to get it? Can I buy it in California?
Yes, you can. If you go to ranchfoodsdirect.com, you can buy our meat, or mycallicrate.com, and then there's a link there to the Ranch Foods Direct site.
Wonderful. Awesome.
There's a lot to sort through here, and there's never been so much misinformation. So let's show a lot more respect for a cow that eats grass and provides us good food. Wow. I mean, if we are left alone on the world and all we have is a cow and preferably a bull, we're good to go. We can eat and we'll be fine. But we don't respect a cow nearly enough, and what she does with that rumen of hers.
Yeah, no, it's kind of magic. They got superpowers. Anyway, thank you so much,
Right.
Mike. It's been a wonderful pleasure. I'm sure I didn't ask all the right questions, but like I said, maybe we get you back down the road, and hopefully, like I said, there'll be something happens that we have some good news to report on. And I know we're up against a huge vested interest that has trillions of dollars of capital, and that's not a good position to be in, but I think it's worth the fight. So thanks for what you do, Mike.
Well, thank you too. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely, guys. All right, guys, we're going to shut this one down. I'll see folks tomorrow. Mike, take care. This will be we'll get this up on our channel here very soon. Let you know when that occurs. And like I said, you're welcome anytime. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. See you later.
Appreciate it. Bye, guys.